Episode 11 begins with the Holograms driving their iconic vehicle, the Rock and Roaster, to the Colorado Rockies. Of course, there's nothing better than that. So they head towards the Green Fern Resort, which is owned by Rick Franklin. Now, inside, we see Rick talking on the phone with the banker. You could tell he was upset and distressed. Then minutes later, when the hologram showed up, Asha of the holograms was asking Rick if he was okay because, according to her, he sounded upset. And according to Rick, he told Asha that he's indeed upset and that he's in serious trouble if he didn't pay his mortgage. Since Rick knew that the holograms were friends of Howard Sands, that's when they went ahead and signed the registry book and decided to have some fun for a while. So while the holograms are busy skiing, that's when they should have realized that they weren't alone because the holograms are surrounded by the Misfits and Clash. You remember Clash from the three-part story. And along with their song, You Gotta Be Fast. And that's when Jim was surrounded by the four women and they were throwing snowballs at her until Svensson comes out of nowhere. And that's when the Misfits decided to run off. So after Svensson shows up and tells Jim that 4 against 1 is not exactly good odds, that's when Rio shows up later to look at Svensson and then he walks off. And that's when Jim apologizes to Svensson and she had no idea what's going on with Rio lately. When back at the lodge, the customers are complaining about the stage accidents that was caused by the Misfits, which Rick wasn't aware of, and demanded their money back. So when the holograms came back minutes later, that's when Kimber made a suggestion with Jim that since we're here anyway, why don't we put on a concert? And Jim agrees. So Jim told Rick's customers that if we're not entertaining you by then, but at the end of the week, you'll get your money back. And so the customers agreed and they let Rick have another chance. So when outside, Rick confessed to Jim that just many years ago that he built a resort by ants, but now somebody wants it really bad. And wouldn't you know it, that someone was Eric Raymond. So when Eric showed up, that's when Jim asked him the question, since when are you so interested in skiing? And then Eric makes it clear that he's here for a profit. And that's when she discussed it with the banker, the same banker that Rick's talking to, that not to worry, that the mortgage will be paid by the end of the week. And even better, there's going to be a concert. So after Eric and the banker agrees, that's when they left. Eric, who was angry and annoyed, said that the concert should never happen because he, as always, has a plan. So Zipper, later that night, decided to be on a mission, and one of the first things he did was to uncouple the ski lift. So the next morning, when the holograms are on the ski lift, Jim tries to cheer up her bandmates to say if we defeated the Misfits once, they'll do it again. They didn't know that the ski lift was sabotaged thanks to Zipper, who's Eric's right-hand guy. So when Jim Who fell off the chair of the ski lift, Sheena, good news for her, she held on to her, but she has no idea how much longer she'll hold on. Rio down below, who saw that Jim's in trouble, he rushes off to the rescue, but then said if something happened to Jim, he'll never forgive himself. But just when things are looking bad, suddenly a helicopter with Svensson appears. Good news, all the girls were saved, and of course the last to be rescued was Rio. It was during a helicopter ride back to the lodge that both of the men are exchanging insults with each other. Well, back with Rick, that was the last straw, and so he decided that when the holograms came back, he told him he's closing the lodge for good. But Ozzy refused and told him if it happens, that it belongs to Eric. Even Kimber told him the excessive way and told him not to give up, and that's when Jim decided to have Eric to be stopped once and for all, and she told that to Rick. So meanwhile, at Eric's lodge below Rick Franklin's, he was talking to the banker. Eric wanted to make sure to the banker that everything goes well as planned. And why is that? Because once Rick fails to pay the mortgage, then that means the lodge belongs to him. Once Eric sees the helicopter outside, the banker told him that he should handle it on his own, and so he left. So when Rick shows up minutes later, that's when Eric realizes that Rick wasn't alone. Jim and the Holograms were with Rick. And that's when Rick confronted with Eric to say, how dare you lose my customers this way? And that's when Rick tries to punch Eric, that's when Eric says, wait, we could be civilized about this. And that's when Eric suggested to Rick to say, how about a sporting contest between you and your girls against mine? Winner takes all. What's your decision? So Rick agrees with Eric that they can have a skiing contest on Saturday, and when Jim realized that Saturday is the same day as the concert, she told Swenson that she wasn't sure if it was a good idea. So that's when Swenson tells her it's a great idea. So he suggested to be the Holograms' personal trainer and got them started with the song of the Holograms and the Mistress, of course, with "It's Working Out and It's Doing Me In." So when Saturday came, that's when the contest started. So when the skiing contest went the way it's planned, that's when both bands should have known that both Zipper and his goons were also there setting traps for everyone that comes across. So after Kimber falls into a snow pit and Shayna being distracted by a snowblower, so it's now up to Jim to go past Pizzazz and Roxy. And that's when Roxy decided to elbow Jim's ear. So meanwhile, it's now Clash's turn to create a distraction. And how? By using her symbols to create an avalanche. But luckily for Jim, she spotted a cave nearby and went inside the cave. Meanwhile, at the finish line, the three men, Rio, Swinson, and Rick, are wondering why the ladies hadn't showed up yet. And that's when they saw Eric talking to the banker and told him that everything went as planned. So when the Misfits crossed the finish line first, that's when Rio, Swinson, and Rick sensed that something was off. So Simpson made a suggestion with Rio that since the holograms hadn't arrived at the finish line, they decided to split up and look for them. So that's what they did. So back with Asha, good news for her, she manages to hear the voice of Kimber that's in the snow pit. So she rescues her first, and then both Kimber and Asha manage to rescue Shayna from the thin ice. So now that both Kimber and Shayna were rescued, that's when Swinson and Rio showed up. And when they found out that Jim hasn't arrived, that's when the holograms realized that they had just lost the skiing contest. So it's now up to the two men to find Jim, wherever she may be. Back inside the cave, that's when Jim realizes that she wasn't alone because she spotted a bear in front of her. Luckily for Jim, she has a flashlight. So when the bear went on to attack, Jim lost one of her earrings, and the other was spent thanks to Roxy. And that's when she changed into Jerrica. And when Rio showed up minutes later, that's when he too gets attacked by a bear as an attempt to rescue her. So as the last resort, Jerka picks up the earring and changed Rio into a horrible creature that scared the daylights out of the bear. So after the bear ran off, the creature changed back into Rio, and then Jerka changed back into Jim. And then when Jim and Rio reunite, that's when Rio thought that he saw Jerka, or at least that's what he told Jim, but Jim just brushed it off and said, "Don't be ridiculous." And that's when they spotted something shining up ahead. So meanwhile, back at Rick's lodge, that's when the banker and Eric met the holograms when they came back, and that's when Eric asked Kimber a question if she believed that she's losing gracefully, and that's when Rick pleaded his case to say if he didn't, he would have punched Eric's lights out by now. And that's when minutes later Rio and Jim showed up, and guess what they found? Silver inside the same cave that they have left from. And even better, thanks to the silver that Rio and Jim found, that means that Rick can pay off his mortgage. Now the banker is getting upset with Eric and asked him how could he have not known about the silver on Rick's property. Then Rick, however, approaches both the banker and of course Eric to say that he should know better than that because according to Rick, what he said to Eric that the banker's in on it too. And that's when Kimber insulted Eric by calling him a creep and then said that the mistress had been cheating. So Eric then tells her after he said a deal's a deal because he won anyway. And so he then said that if you have any proof of this, then why don't you prove it? And that's when Svensson came out of nowhere. And that's when Eric saw before his eyes Eric Scoons and of course Zipper, his right hand guy, being tied up. And that's when Svensson explains that while he's looking for Jim, he's dead bumped into Zipper and his Scoons. And guess what? Zipper confessed. After the banker learned the truth, he's now upset with Eric because now, thanks to Eric, as the banker said, that means the banker can go to jail. That's when Eric pleaded his case to say, "Why? This was your idea." So we know what this means. The banker was right, and so the banker ended up in jail. The misfits are not performing after all. So you know what this also means? That means that Jim and the holograms, thanks to the silver that she and Rio found, that means the mortgage was paid and Rick's lodge had been saved. So what better way to celebrate the victory with Jim and her bandmates with the song Love Is Here? And so after the audience cheered, and so that ends episode 11.